You can't do it. The two are contradictory. The very policies of sanctuary cities not only endanger those in the community and the country at large, but they also undercut law enforcement at all levels each and every day. So they really defy common sense. So when you hear a Governor Waltz or a Mayor Fry of Minneapolis, or even the Attorney General from there stand up and say that they agree with the Department of Homeland Security when it comes to prioritizing public safety, is just outright ridiculous, right? And disingenuous, and an insult to really everybody.
Every year we have the Attorney General speak, and we also have the Secretary of Homeland Security speak. And that's because of Chuck Marino. He was working for Janet Napolitano. He called me up one day and he said, "Craig, I love that you have the AG speak at your candlelight vigil, but what about the Secretary of Homeland Security, huh?" And a little respect there. And we've been doing it ever since. It's a tradition that continues thanks to this gentleman. So.
Chuck, you said something I don't want to miss here, because you mentioned Obama administration. That's where you were serving at the DHS. Okay. What about these sanctuary cities? Mm-hmm. They existed during the Obama administration. And I'm listening to all the chatter, and here's what I'm hearing, and I'd love your opinion. Number one, how did Obama's administration handle those? And number two, is it your view that the sanctuary cities are at the very heart of this mess?
So you can't say that you are a sanctuary city and then also say you prioritize public safety. The difference is, you're right, sanctuary cities have existed for a long time. The Obama administration did have to deal with sanctuary cities while they were doing the same things that the Trump administration is doing right now. The difference is, those communities, while they still prevented state and local law enforcement from working collaboratively with federal officials, they did not incite and they did not obstruct. That's what we see now. Now we see politicians playing an active role in literally creating a more dangerous environment and totally abandoning not only their state and local responsibilities, like dealing with protesters, but also obstructing federal agents at every step they can. And then you've got the courts, which are different, which we didn't have to deal with during the Obama administration. And that was, you now have activist judges within these sanctuary districts that also try and do everything they can to slow down the process. And oh, by the way, those courts don't have a very good batting average when it comes to being overturned. The Trump administration, up to and including late last week, Minnesota had filed to stop the federal operations.
Yes,
and they were overruled.
Absolutely.
A lower court had agreed with them, and a higher court said, no, you can't have a state that is now impeding federal operations, no matter how much you hate it.
Chuck, and I'm glad you brought that up, because Heroes Behind the Badge and Citizens Behind the Badge, our sponsoring organization, we're all about supporting law enforcement. That's what we do. We are about the men and women of law enforcement. So put yourself back in your shoes as a law enforcement officer, and put yourself in the shoes of today's law enforcement officers who are trying to enforce laws that are being challenged. How do they feel with the venom and the toxicity that's being spewed out there? What's inside the head of the law enforcement officers?
Well, at the federal level, I can tell you that morale's never been higher, from what I hear within ICE and CBP, because let's remember, they're coming off of 4 years of not being allowed to do their jobs.
Good
right?
point.
And if you look at the statistics, if you look purely at the metrics of success, look at those border numbers. Previous secretaries used to think that anything 1,000 encounters on the southwest border or higher was a crisis.
Right.
I mean, we're down at single digits, zero releases into the country. So that means if you're here illegally, you come up with a claim of amnesty or asylum, rather, then that you historically you were released into the country until your asylum hearing, and
Right.
that's been stopped. That was a loophole that's been stopped. So, but I got to tell you, I think the goal from at least Minnesota has been to make the job of ICE and CBP as hard and as publicly messy as
Yeah.
possible. That's why I think what President Trump said over the weekend was genius. And that is they got sucked into having ICE and CBP dealing with protesters. No,
Yeah.
don't do that. That's not their job. If
Yeah, he
state and
just
local
said
law enforcement's abandoning you, then why are you picking up responsibility and doing their jobs, which,
that's a
by the
great
way, is going to be the messiest part?
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
a great
100%. And I want to go back to what you said, which is probably going to be a surprise or a shocker to some people about the morale and the feds being so high at the moment. But quite frankly, law enforcement expects to be shit on, expects to have all kinds of problems with the scum of the earth that they're dealing with out on the streets and whatnot. But, the biggest problem with morale generally is internal, and it's how you're treated internally by the bosses, any number of political things that affects you from the inside. With the Trump administration's support of federal law enforcement across the board right now, it's got to be a huge boom for the federal law enforcement officers. And Chuck, maybe you can just expound on this a little bit. It was my understanding, I heard that there were something like 10,000 applications that had come in to DHS since Trump took office.
Well, yeah, and the other thing is the old saying, don't tell me what you value, show me your budget, and I'll tell you what you value. Look at the money that CBP and ICE have received under the big beautiful bill. I mean, which is funny because we've got this, partial shutdown right now because of DHS, Democrats say, and because of the operations of ICE. But this partial shutdown doesn't hurt ICE in any way at all, nor does it hurt CBP because they are so plush with cash from that big beautiful bill that operations are going to continue unimpeded. And oh, by the way, all of those employees are going to continue showing up to work during any type of a shutdown because they're essential personnel. And so not only are they going to keep showing up and doing the job, they're also going to be back paid. And so this isn't having the effect that Democrats think it would on law enforcement. But yeah, no, look, the morale is important. The applications are through the roof and they're being allowed to do their jobs. And people like to see results. And that's what they're saying.
And maybe you can expound a little bit because there's been a narrative going around, especially in the liberal media, about the fact that these folks that are now coming out of the academy, working for the feds, are not sufficiently trained. What say you?
Well, yeah, I mean, they're going through the same type of training. It is not abbreviated, but I would say all of the agencies throughout DHS have taken a hard look over the years at training and can it be consolidated in certain areas? And I think, of course, the answer is yes. They're doing it to save money. They're doing it to get agents operational out onto the streets a little bit sooner. But as far as the context in which the perceived lack of training being put forth by Democrats is, it's not happening. They're still going through adequate and ample use of force training. They're still going through ample firearms training. Let's not forget too, many of these folks are also coming from previous law enforcement careers at the state and local level or the military. And so they're no strangers to use of force policy. They're no strangers to handling firearms. And so I think that's just a bunch of nonsense, but it goes to the overall narrative that the Democrats want to play, right? They're out of control. This is messy. There's no forethought given to this, and they're just throwing agents out onto the street to execute this operations. When in all reality, Tom Homan and Kristi Noem were always honest with sanctuary cities, and they said the less you cooperate, the more agents you're going to see in your communities.
Hey, Chuck, one of the things that bothers me most about what's happening in Minneapolis is ICE agents have become the enemy. All right. Tim Walz, the governor in Minnesota, has said we are at war. And basically, he's declaring war between the citizens of Minnesota and the ICE agents that are there. Now, here's the problem. ICE agents don't set policy. All right. They're not the political leaders that tell them what to do or where to go. They have a job to do to protect this nation, to provide national security and peace, hopefully, in the streets of America. But in Minneapolis, that's not happening. That the people have basically gone to war against ICE agents. And I'd love your comment on that. I mean, you served as a Secret Service agent for many years. You served at the Department of Homeland Security for many years. And yet ICE agents all of a sudden are the enemy. The officers who are trying to enforce the laws of this country in a lawful manner have become the enemy. And this is frustrating to me because you can protest the policies. You may not like a particular law. You can vote out those legislators that enacted those laws, but it's not the ICE agents that are setting policy or deciding where to go and how to do their job. They're just out there. They've been told what to do. They're doing it. And frankly, it's a very difficult job, a very dangerous job. Your comment?
Well, it's pretty interesting that sanctuary cities in general are going after law enforcement, ICE agents, and CBP agents the way that they are. Typically, politics used to stay exactly there, right? Aim your rhetoric at the head of the executive branch, the president of the United States. But I'll take it another step further. What's interesting? You never hear come out of somebody like Governor Walz's mouth is the role that Congress plays here. I mean, to your point, this is a no-brainer. Congress passes the laws, and the executive branch, ICE and CBP, enforce them. And all the way up to the president. The president's right when he says, look, it's my job to enforce the laws. You've heard Barack Obama say the same thing. It's not my job to choose between right and wrong and what laws I'm going to enforce on a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and what laws I'm not going to enforce on Tuesdays and Thursdays. That's not the way it works. My job is to enforce the laws that are on the books, and this is what I'm going to do. So, for a politician to take issue with the men and women that are doing jobs that are much, much more dangerous than theirs, which is why it always amuses me when they incite all this rhetoric, usually standing behind their gates in their house, which are being protected by guess who? Law enforcement. And, but yet they throw these arrows and it makes the job much more dangerous. As a law enforcement officer, it's infuriating because you've got things like doxing going on that's giving up not only the personal information of the agents, but also the families. It's endangering, their kids. And it's a gross misrepresentation of what they're doing. When you really, if you're staying honest about it, when you look at the totality of threats that were allowed into the country from 180 different countries that were encountered, many special interest locations that no matter how much Biden and Mayorkas said they were vetted, there's no feasible way to thoroughly vet these people coming from these locations because there's no systems to vet against. So when you think about the threats in that totality, why aren't these sanctuary politicians taking issues with Congress, including Democrats?
Just clowns. These people are clowns. You talk about Mayorkas. My God, Mayorkas was just a pathetic liar. How could you bold-faced get in front of? I hope to see that they do something about this. But as we're harping on Minnesota, I've got some statistics here. There's 1,370 detainers in Minnesota. Those are illegals,
Mhm.
criminals that are being held in the jails. We should talk a little bit about that because I don't think they're talking about this on mainstream media. The fact of the matter is, if these sanctuary cities were just cooperating and allowing law enforcement to go into the jails, I hear Homan say this, I hear a number of people say this. Takes one or two agents to go into the jail. It's a peaceful transfer. There's not going to be violence. Everybody's protected. You're in the security of the jail versus sending a team out to go get these guys. Chuck, maybe talk a little bit about the dynamics of that.
Yeah, well, that was the point. You just hit on the number of detainers that are not being honored statewide. And this goes to part of the strategy, which, by the way, was also the strategy of the Obama administration. We used to have a program called 287G, which was called Secure Communities, where you started deputizing state and local law enforcement to enforce immigration law. To kind of be a force multiplier for ICE. But yeah, you're right. And this is, to my earlier point about creating a lot safer environment for everybody, a lot less messy when you allow ICE agents into the jails, when you have those immigration detainers being honored, not just by the state, but also at the local levels. They're the majority when it comes to controlling all of these jails, right? And also allowing state and local law enforcement to cooperate with ICE and CBP. Now, I think the administration would be the first to tell you that they're not expecting state and locals in Minnesota to help them enforce immigration law because of the sanctuary policy. But what they are doing is they're expecting them to show up if ICE agents become overburdened,
Overwhelmed, yes.
yeah, overwhelmed by these protests, or there's a public safety issue with ICE agents, and they expect them to share intelligence.
Hey,
share intelligence.
I want to. You made a very important point here about what is needed, the cooperation that's needed between the feds and the local and states. Let's go back to Tom Homan. I thought Homan made a masterclass speech last week on the solutions to this problem. One of his solutions is that if indeed the city and state governments of Minnesota will allow him and his agents to go into these jails and pick up these people without a protest or violence, that he will consider moving out some of the troops, some of the ICE agents and Border Patrol people. Give us some thoughts on what Homan said. Do you think it's going to hold? He claims that they gave him some agreement, but then some of the rhetoric after that speech he gave seemed to kind of go backwards. But what are your thoughts?
Well, sanctuary cities have a very bad habit of not keeping promises. Just think about the promise that Eric Adams made in New York to Tom Homan to his face about letting ICE agents into Rikers, and it never happened.
Yeah.
And that was at the beginning of the administration when Eric Adams found himself at odds with the White House and at odds with the Democratic Party. So they never let him into Rikers Island, and that's indicative of how sanctuary cities make and then don't keep promises. But you're right. Every action has a reaction. And I think here, if you put the action on the city of Minneapolis and Minnesota, if they were to do the right thing, then that allows Tom Homan and Kristi Noem to right size operations. That is to look at the numbers and say, do we need to hit the streets the way we've been hitting them, as hard as we've been hitting them, because we're getting no help at all? And I think the answer is they'd rather decrease those numbers on the street. They'd rather it be a lot safer. They'd rather have less interactions with the general public as they're looking for these national security threats throughout the city. But let's face it, sanctuary cities are where you have to go and where you have to stay when you're looking for all these threats that came into the country. This is where they're being harbored. This is where they're being protected. this is where they're being released over and over back out onto the streets to commit more crimes. So, from a strategic standpoint from the side of ICE and CBP, sanctuary cities are the natural place you need to go.
Isn't
Well,
that
and
isn't that
Minneapolis is.
the
Absolutely.
problem
Go ahead,
with
Chip. Go
the
ahead, Craig.
citizens of Minneapolis? They don't seem to appreciate the fact that ICE agents are there in their city trying to rid them of these serious criminals
Yeah.
that have come in from foreign countries illegally. And ICE agents are doing them a favor by making their city safer
Yeah.
if they'd
You
let
know.
them do their job and do it
Yeah.
safely. I think you make a great point that if they got the cooperation from the locals, they wouldn't put themselves at such great risk. The ICE agents, all right,
Right.
they are
Look at the-
being rocks are being thrown at them. People are coming to protest with guns. I mean, we saw that with Preddy. Not a smart thing to do, and unfortunately, he tragically lost his life. I mean, this is what I think upsets me, that there's a lot of ignorance out there, especially in sanctuary cities, about why ICE agents are trying to do a job to help them and keep their community safer.
Well, I want to just expound on that. I think that there's a lot of ignorant people that are out there protesting in Minneapolis, but I think it's far deeper than this. The dynamic when we're talking about sanctuary cities, I think Minneapolis is way different than a lot of places. And why it is right now is because they're trying to distract and look at this shiny object over here. Don't focus so much on all this fraud that's going on. And I think people like Tampon Tim and the emasculated putz that's the mayor there, and the lapdog police chief and all those people, they're going along with this. They're encouraging all of this anarchy to take place because it's taking away that focus. Because before all this happened, it was all about the amount of fraud that was going on in Minneapolis, and now they're not talking about it as much.
This is definitely a diversionary tactic for sure. There's no doubt about it. The more they can talk about ICE and CBP and the perceived mess that this is causing in their community, the less they're talking about that fraud, which is in the billions and will probably be one of the biggest stories and crimes of fraud to ever hit this country. It'll make the COVID fraud look like it was nothing. But look, this is what happens when you have politicians that not only want to enrich themselves, but also want to prioritize those that shouldn't be in the country in the first place, believe they're entitled to absolutely everything that would traditionally go to the American public first for those that are truly in need. But no, you're right. I mean, it's irresponsible. In some cases, we're going to find it's criminal. And let's remember, we keep talking about the protests. Yeah, there's some local organic groups that are protesting. And you know what? They're probably peaceful. But it's the outside organized groups that you're going to find a lot of Democratic money behind. You're going to find foreign influence, typically from an adversary, to fund and organize these groups that historically come from outside of the area, have no interest. And oh, by the way, if this weren't a protest about immigration, but was a protest of the Middle East, you would see the same people showing up for the same protests, and they have no idea what they're doing there. They couldn't explain the issues to you. They have no thoughts on this that we would consider well thought out. And so that's what they do. They come in, they cause turmoil. We saw it in 2020 when Minneapolis burned, when they walked away from police departments and gave up those cities. So this really is, on the side of the Democrats, I think another black eye for them amongst the voting population that are law-abiding, that are supporters of law enforcement like we all are, and want to see the laws of this country enforced.
Chuck, the Philadelphia sheriff the other day called the ICE agents wannabe cops. basically acting as if they didn't really have law enforcement status. They weren't properly trained. She even threatened to arrest ICE agents if they came into the city of Philadelphia, which was outrageous. I think you, as much as anybody, former Secret Service agent, served at the Department of Homeland Security, I think you have a great understanding and appreciation for the job ICE agents do, the training they have, the importance to this country. I'd like you to comment on that.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, I would, and I've heard that sheriff in Philadelphia. I've heard what she's had to say now quite a few times. And I'd love to know where the National Sheriff's Association is with her.
Really?
Whatever happened to the days of picking up the phone and telling somebody to shut up, that they were embarrassing the profession? That's part of the problem.
Maybe they're listening.
That's part of the problem. Well, I hope they are. And look, it goes for major city chiefs. It goes for the IACP. Where are you? You got this I think, Craig, you called this chief the lapdog out in Minneapolis. Where's major city chiefs calling this guy up and saying, "What is there something wrong with you?"
Chuck, you couldn't be more on target about that. I mean, the lack of leadership, the lack of balls, stand up for the troops, stand up, do the right thing. It's shocking that people are so worried about hurting somebody's feelings. Bullshit. You've just got to be. We were talking about this the other day. It's the dumbing of America. It's almost like the dumbing of law enforcement. You've got some of these DEI hires that are leading agencies that are dumber than rocks, and they are an embarrassment, and they need to be challenged.
Yeah, and ultimately, look, I mean, it's a problem that only the people can solve in those communities, because they're the ones that are voting for this, and so ultimately you got to look at it almost at the the micro level, and you got to say, well, look, who's ultimately to blame for this? Were the voters not able to tell what this person was going to do and what they were going to prioritize, and so, but I think, look, I think sometimes somebody needs to pick up the phone and say, enough is enough. You are killing us as sheriffs around this country. And this is not what we do. And this is not what we say. And we certainly don't talk about arresting other law enforcement officers when they're legally doing their jobs.
Exactly.
That's key. These men and women are doing the jobs according to the laws and to their statutory authorities.
So, Chuck, you're the founder and CEO of your very own global security firm called Sentinel.
Yes.
And so you are, after your life after Secret Service involves some very high level security and intelligence advisory jobs.
Yes.
I would love your input as a CEO, as a leader, as a security and intelligence leader in this country. If you were in charge, if all of a sudden they called up and say, Chuck, take over this mess and fix it. Give us Chuck's solution to this mess that's going on up in Minneapolis.
Well, it goes well beyond Minneapolis, right? Minneapolis is one of the things. First thing that I've spoken about extensively is there is no way that federal taxpayers should still be funding sanctuary cities, especially when we talk about, as Craig knows very well, especially when we talk about all of these public safety grants that come from DHS and the Department of Justice. I mean, we're talking about billions and billions of dollars. I mean, you look at New York City alone, it's almost $1 billion in terms of all the types of aid that they get to help public safety, implement public safety policies and terrorism prevention. So why, again, if you have a city that does not believe in enforcing any part of the law. And as much as we used to say that Homeland Security begins with hometown security, and you have hometowns within sanctuary states that do nothing to move forward public safety, why do we continue to reward this and consider this to be successful policies? And so the first thing is you got to use the power of the purse. And I don't think to date that the Trump administration has exhausted that as much as they could through the courts.
Yeah, I think that was challenged, wasn't it? I think they tried to do that. It got challenged in court. And then I just saw this week that there was some senator or congressman that actually was talking about legislation to
Lindsey Graham.
Lindsey Graham. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But you're right. But I mean, you've got to exhaust the court system, because if you look at the cases that have gone to the Supreme Court, that's another area that the Trump administration's done very well. I think they've only taken 1 or 2 losses in the Supreme Court, and all these other cases they have won when it comes to immigration. I love what the administration is doing in terms of this multifaceted approach. You know, you've got to deal with your own hemisphere, the Western Hemisphere. You've got to deal with places like Venezuela and Mexico and Colombia. I was a firm believer in designating the cartels and these violent gangs as foreign terrorist organizations. Yep. It gives the executive branch a lot more authorities when it comes to going after them. And I like what we're doing here with our own border. This is a walk and chew gum strategy. It had to be. And I think when you look at this strategic approach holistically by the Trump administration, you see that they're hitting all of the areas that they need to right now. And the numbers, again, back to the numbers. Look at fentanyl. Fentanyl is dropping. Look at the movement of drugs on the waterways coming from Venezuela. That's down 97%. And oh, by the way, that's not only impacting drugs that are leaving Venezuela, it's drugs that are coming via the waterways through other locations as well, too. I think there's still room to get a lot tougher with Mexico. Mexico is something I've paid attention to for a very, very long time. The level of corruption and fear and intimidation. Look, when you've got the cartels as the 3rd largest employer in the country, that's not good.
Wow.
Yeah. That's not good. And a lot of people don't realize they operate like legitimate businesses operate in terms of their structure and how they look at money. But of course, everything that they're involved in is a detriment not only to Mexico, but to the United States, a threat to the United States. And I got to tell you, anybody that steps out of line and voices opposition to them from a governmental standpoint is usually eliminated.
Yeah. You know, Chuck, I just want to reiterate that, because that's such a massive statistic and point that in Mexico, the cartels are the 3rd largest employer in the country. That's shocking. You know, there was an interview yesterday, I believe, when they had the ambassador to Mexico on, and the question was, who's running the country, the president or the drug cartels? Mm-hmm. And the guy would not answer that question.
Yeah. Well, it's clear. It's clearly the cartels.
He knew the answer.
Yeah. Crazy.
Chuck, when you talk about a solution to this problem, though, don't you agree that a lot of it's the political hyperbole? You and I talked about this a little bit offline. I mean, the Trump administration, yes, has gotten tough, and maybe, calling them domestic terrorists in Minneapolis, et cetera, might have been gone too far. But they've been pushed by the local leadership in Minneapolis, the mayor, the governor of Minnesota, basically declaring war on ICE and on the Trump administration for their policies and how they're trying to enforce the law which, as you pointed out, was given to them by Congress. The political irresponsibility, I think, is at the heart of this issue. Sanctuary city policies, certainly. But then when the feds do go in and try to make a city safer, all of a sudden the mayor, the governor, all the leadership, even the chief of police is coming down against the feds. This is a problem, and I think that feeds into the media. The media loves this stuff, right? They love all the political hyperbole, so they can fuel the fires and get everybody all ratcheted up, and then you end up with people dying needlessly.
Well, let's look at what the Biden administration said from day one. You can't secure the border. You can't enforce the immigration laws because we need overall immigration reform. Meanwhile, we always had Title VIII, which is the foundation of the enforcement of immigration laws. You had things in place like Remain in Mexico that gave a pause to those claiming asylum until they were thoroughly vetted before they were even considered to be let into the country. He stood that down. He stood down every other executive order President Trump did related to these issues in his first term. So they were disingenuous about the law. You always had the laws on the books. You always had the authorities on the books already to secure the border and enforce the immigration laws. They just chose not to do it. They were looking at kicking the can down the road. And ultimately, if you look at the bills that they put forth, including the last one that was rejected, their bills always included a goal of amnesty, mass amnesty. And I have said from day one that if you paid attention closely, the answer was as obvious as the day is long. They were looking to change the demographics of the United States. They were looking to give those in the country illegal the right to vote, ultimately. They were trying to do it through amnesty. And that was the goal. It was to hold on to power. It was how can we change and influence the Democratic voter base in this country to make sure that we hold on to power long term.
The majority of Americans voted them out of office.
It's the numbers.
Right? That's why Trump got elected in part, is because of the immigration problem in this country. And now that he comes in and he's closed the border, he's deporting the heinous criminals that have come in through the porous border. And now, people are crucifying him and the ICE agents for enforcing those laws and doing the job that the voters wanted them to do.
Right. No, that's exactly right. So, I mean, the answers have always been there. It's a little uncomfortable sometimes for some people to say what the honest answer is. But if you look at it, I mean, look, you had votes on the Hill. You had legislation put forth by the District of Columbia that wanted to do what? Give illegals the right to vote.
Right.
Look at other Democrats. You had some of them saying the quiet part out loud, not realizing that they were supposed to shut up, saying, look, this is messing up my redistricting efforts by not giving them amnesty, So, the answers are there. And now, so that's an example of where the politics overtook the national security interests of the country. And in that case, the politics of the Biden administration were completely wrong. They ignored the common sense things to do to keep the country safe. They chose to purposely ignore those. And this is where we are now. So when everybody's complaining about how the cleanup is going in the interior of the country, let's take a step back and remember who caused this mess in the first place.
Yeah. Well, if Biden hadn't let nearly 20 million people into the country, we wouldn't have these enormous battles today. It would be business as usual, but now it's not. Yeah. Now it's an enhanced enforcement action that has to be taken.
Well, and you wouldn't have innocent Americans being killed, right? Being raped, being 100%. being trafficked. And the other thing is, the policies of the Biden administration made it more dangerous for everybody, not just the American public, but look how many illegals that chose to make the journey to the United States. How many of them lost their lives? How many of them were raped and assaulted and killed? We don't know, right? And how many are trafficked into human trafficking? So they created a nightmare not only for this country but for the entire region. And oh, by the way, along the way, their policies empowered the cartels like they've never been empowered before financially. The cartels have never been richer.
Really?
Okay, which is or have grown to the size that they are now. So the reason why we're dealing with the scale of the problem that we are is because of these policies. These policies had an adverse effect on everything. And now you've got an administration that's taking care of the problem. And you want to know something? It's a big problem.
Yeah, it is.
Well, and Dennis, I don't know how you all feel, but I think Chuck has really helped to bring clarity
Wow.
to this issue. Minneapolis is a mess, but there's a lot more to it. And Chuck has really, I think, defined what's going on. So, Chuck, I thank you for coming on today. This has been awesome.
Absolutely. I would
thank you.
To ask Chuck, maybe we ought to have you come back a few times and really, you make sense of this stuff.
Yeah.
And that's what our audience wants. They want to make sense of this. But I have a question to kind of maybe start closing this out. Okay. Citizens Behind the Badge is all about the cops. We support the men and women of law enforcement. Okay. Now we understand, as Tom Homan said the other day, not every cop is perfect and not every operation is perfect. There's always things that we can do to be better. But what is it if the men and women of law enforcement are listening today? Do you have a message for them? What would you like to say to them as a person who served as one of them and also as the founder of a business and a DHS employee? What would be your message?
Yeah, look, don't fall for the traps that are being laid for you each and every day by those in the country that have these radical ideologies, either that don't believe the laws of this country should be enforced or that the men and women tasked with enforcing them are evil. Don't fall into that trap. Understand that there's organizations like yours that provide a very important service to voice and demonstrate that support each and every day. And that the majority of Americans believe that this country has to be a country of law and order. No civilized society can survive without it. So the majority of Americans are on the side of law enforcement. They understand that the job is hard enough on a regular day. But now with all this political nonsense coming from the radical left does not represent what the overwhelming majority of the country feels about law and the enforcement of law and about those that enforce it. So, especially for these law enforcement officers that are operating in these sanctuary cities, look, many of them are not operating in these sanctuary cities because of the sanctuary policies. They're operating because that's where they're from. That's where they've chosen to live. That's where they've chosen to raise their kids. So especially for them, don't fall into the traps that the local politicians are setting for these men and women, and try not to get hurt, because in a lot of these communities, these policies unfortunately are setting these law enforcement departments and these law enforcement officers up for failure.
Yeah. What a great inspirational message. That is extremely well said. I don't think any of us could have said it as well as you, Chuck. That was beautifully done. And thank you for that. I want to make sure that our audience knows how to get in touch with you. Okay.
Yeah.
Would you mind sharing your contact information?
Sure. My company website is Sentinel, SENTINEL.security. You can find information about our company, information about the entire team. And then I'm on X, Charles_Marino. And you can also find my website at charlesmarino.com.
Great.
Perfect.
I'm sure a lot of people would like to reach out to you.
Of course.
You have such a common sense, articulate way of framing all this. And I think that's what we need now.
Well, great. Thank you. No, look, this is what I try and do. I try and, cut through all the noise and really analyze it and say, look, this is the way policies and ideologies are going to impact us. And it's either going to be right or it's going to be wrong. There's no hybrid here. And I think we're seeing that the policies of sanctuary cities are grossly inept and very dangerous.
Indeed. So I can't help but ask you one last question. During
Sure.
this interview, I've heard a little chirping in the background, and I wasn't sure.
No, I
that
don't
was
know
some-
what I don't know what that noise is.
I thought maybe you had a bird or something.
No,
Is there a
maybe-
bird in your?
No, it may be the heater. Yeah,
There was something chirping.
I haven't.
Was I the only one
we
hearing
needed
that?
some bird shot.
Was I the only one hearing that, or was did
I
you all
heard
hear
it.
the
Yeah,
little?
I heard it.
Yeah,
No,
okay.
I hear it a little bit. No, it's not. It's not.
I was a
Sorry
little
about
concerned
that.
about what that
Yeah.
was, but you're
Yeah.
okay, right? You're not in any
I'm-
danger of any
I'm
sort.
I'm in an old building, so it makes a lot of different noises.
Okay. We'll attribute it to the oldness of the building. How's that?
Yeah, it's got to be the HVAC unit.
Yeah.
All right.
Again, thank you,
You
Chuck,
got
for
it,
this.
guys. You got it.
I want to close out by reminding our audience Heroes Behind the Badge is a podcast brought to you by Citizens Behind the Badge. Citizens Behind the Badge is the leading voice of the American people in support of the men and women of law enforcement. You can reach out and contact us at citizensbehindthebadge.org. Okay. On there, you'll find out everything you need to know about how you can get involved with the hundreds of thousands of Americans that have already pledged their support for law enforcement. If you like anything that Chuck said today, and it would be hard not to like it because it's right on, subscribe, like, follow, and even more important, leave a comment. Maybe there was something Chuck said you didn't agree with. That's fine. That's what this is for. If you did agree, that's fine too. If you want more information, give us some guidance as to what kind of guests we can have on this podcast, because we'd like to get guests that you like and that you respond to. So make sure to make some comments, okay? And of course, heroesbehindthebadge.com is the address of this particular podcast. We on Heroes Behind the Badge, we tell real stories about real cops, and we blow away the fake news about the police. Thanks again for listening. If you subscribe, remember you'll be the first to know when the next new episode comes out. And we've got some exciting new episodes planned. Stay tuned, subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Heroes Behind the Badge.